Boa tarde, bem-vindos de volta. Eu sou a Vanessa Pedelos, sou gerente de projetos de inglês aqui no British Council. Vou falar minha audiodescrição. Eu sou uma mulher branca, com cabelos castanhos, um pouquinho abaixo do ombro. Eu estou usando um óculos com uma lente preta, um pouquinho grossa, e uma camisa cinza. O fundo atrás de mim é bege, com alguns livros ao fundo. Esperamos que todos vocês tenham gostado das sessões dessa manhã e que estejam todos prontos para as 2 sessões que nós vamos ter hoje à tarde. Eu só vou lembrar todos vocês as regras. Convidamos todos a fazer comentários, perguntas, sempre mantendo respeito e os comentários se mantenham sempre positivos. Se alguém ainda não se inscreveu, ainda dá tempo, se inscrevam para receber nosso certificado no final do curso. As próximas 2 sessões, elas vão ser bilíngues, então elas serão legendadas no nosso canal do Brasil e com áudio original no canal das Américas, no link que está fixado aqui abaixo. A nossa próxima sessão, ela vai ser sobre comunicação não violenta, e a última sessão do dia vai ser continuando a nossa série sobre o futuro do inglês. Então, eu gostaria de apresentar para vocês a nossa palestrante, a Fabiana Multerno. Ela é professora de inglês há 21 anos, com experiência em young learners, em adolescentes e dando aula para adultos também. Ela trabalha na cultura inglesa há mais de 10 anos. Também é professora particular há 5 anos e é membro do Brass Thistle.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fabiana Multerno, but you can call me Fabi. And I'm here today to talk about a subject that is very dear to me. I've been studying this for the past 2 or 3 years, and it's about nonviolent communication, positive discipline, and motivation, and how these 3 are connected and how they can be applied to our classroom. Okay? On the bottom, you have some of my contacts. And if you wish to have access to this presentation, there is this link on the bottom, the campsite bio / Fabi Multerno. You can find more about me over there. Okay. I also have an Instagram, a professional Instagram account, Lighthouse ELT. I'll be glad to continue this conversation in another media if you wish to continue. Okay, so let's go. First of all, I have to say that this work, this research is a work in progress. I feel that it's not very nice to come to a presentation and present definite results. This is not what I'm going for, but I would like to say that so far, what I've been working with has been effective. Of course, there are some drawbacks, but the benefits outweigh it tremendously. Okay, so let's get started. A little bit of me before I start introducing the 3 aspects that I would like to talk to you about. I'm a teacher, I'm a positive educator. I love teaching young learners and teenagers, but I also teach adults, especially lower level learners, which I feel that are the type of public that I really, really enjoy working with, besides, of course, the young learners and teens. I am also a teacher trainer. So I've been talking about it at the school where I work with. Mind you, I have to say that I work at a large institution here in Brazil with branches that are spread all over the country. And I've been working with a number of groups and a number of teachers over the last 5 or 6 years. For the past 2 years, I've also been a course designer. So this school where I work has called me to help them develop courses. I'm also the social media coordinator for the YLT SIG in Brestiço, which is a community of teachers here in Brazil, a large community of teachers here in Brazil. I love music. It is something that I take to my lessons that I really enjoy, I really like to talk about. For this next one, people normally don't think that I am such a thing, right? I really love heavy metal. So I really like Metallica, Megadeth, and so on and so forth. I am proud to say that I'm a nerd, a geek, a gamer. If you come to me with an ideal date, yes, it will probably involve something in this universe. I love reading books. So as anybody that is my age, I love Harry Potter, and some of my friends tell me that I'm a Slitherpuff. So I'm a mix of Slytherin and uh, Hufflepuff, right? But one of the things that it might come as a shock is that I haven't always been a good communicator. With a person that has all these characteristics above, you may think like, okay, she's good at communicating with her students. She's fine. She's going to have no problems talking to people. So it's okay, right? Quite the opposite. I haven't always been a good communicator, especially because I'm shy. People talk that I am what's considered to be an ambivert. I'm very extroverted after people would get to know me, but boy, oh boy, the first contact is very, very hard for me. So this was something that I needed to work on. So bear that in mind. I'm going to come back to this idea. So, because I wasn't a very good communicator, I started studying nonviolent communication, which has led me to go for other topics such as positive discipline and motivation as well. So let's get started with the nonviolent communication. It follows principles of nonviolence. And when I say something like it's a principle of nonviolence, it looks like I'm, peace and love and everything. It's not exactly just that. Uh, Principles of nonviolence, being able to communicate in a way that is clear, right? So it's basically these four essential steps, right? Um, when we talk to people, we hear this person that you're talking to with kindness, with empathy, and when we are communicating, we try to follow these four steps. We normally go for the observation of what has been brought, the feelings that it triggers, some need that you need to communicate, and a request that you can have from the person. It favors clarity, compassion, self-responsibility, and empathy. Allow me to go back a little bit because maybe this wasn't clear enough. So, what normally Rosenberg mentioned in his book, Nonviolent Communication, is that conflicts are generated from needs that are unmet. So it is a thing because imagine that you were talking to a person about random things, and there is some kind of request that you have from this person. Something that maybe is bothering you, something that maybe you need to request, but you are not feeling that comfortable to request it. So he mentions in his book, he claims in this book that by following these steps, you have a frame that is going to make you feel more safe, let's say, and in a way better, right, and more confident to talk to the people around you. It says that is about conflicts, but personally, I do believe that having these 4 steps in my life helped me be more observative, less judgmental, and I've been able to express my feelings in a more effective way. Okay. After that, we also have positive discipline, which is a very well known and spread principle that has to do with how you deal with behavior, which should be firm but kind in the same way. When you are dealing with people around you, let's say a friend or even a child in your family, I would say that this could work with any age, actually. You should display this kind of behavior so that you can expect this kind of behavior from people. It's not about being permissive in any way. It's not about allowing people around you to do whatever they want. It's not about just being kind, but it's about being firm in the same way. Yeah. So the positive discipline shows ways to handle everyday situations. Um, Nowadays, we have variations of books that deal with positive discipline, but you have positive discipline for early years, positive discipline for teenagers, positive discipline for parenting. But really, you also have positive discipline at work. So I am also certified to deal with positive discipline at work, and it's the same principles. It's actually about trying to make the people that are around you um, deal with each other in a more empathetic, connected way. Yes. And it has to do with self regulation and the connection to positive behavior. I would like you to make a quick exercise with this about the students that you have met throughout your life. Um, I believe that most of our audience will be from Latin America, but maybe from other countries. But from my context in Brazil, I know that some students tend to be very emotional when it comes to learning a new language. They tend to think that it's not for them. It's something that it's not really nice. Yeah, it's not something that they can do. So I would like you to have a very quick exercise when it comes to positive discipline towards yourself. Yeah. Because us as teachers, we are also involved in this. Yeah. Do you have, when you are working, regular breathing pauses? I have to say that it's very hard for me to be vigilant, to take regular breathing pauses. That leads me to anxiety, and we have to be in a nice, calm way so that we can apply these principles in positive way, in an effective way. Do you remember to be kind to yourself on a regular basis? And I would like you at the audience at this moment. Do you see what's positive about your behavior? Um, let's stop right now and think about this. Think about 5 people you love. I'll give you 5 seconds for that. Yeah. I can bet some money that among these 5 people that you thought that you love, none of them was yourself. So for us to require this kind of behavior from our students, at any age range, we have to remember that we should be well with ourselves. So this is about positive discipline. Also, if we consider the motivation definition, motivation involves this desire to reduce the discrepancy between yourself at the moment and the projected behavioral standards. So, our students, they are in a way very motivated because they want to bridge that gap from the English that they know at the time and the English that they want to project to society. And this is part of the motivation that they have. But also, if we can align their expectations in a more effective way and deal with some kind of bumps on the road with kindness, with a clear path, this could be a booster for their motivation, right? And this has to do, I'm sure some of you have thought about it. This has to do with Vygotsky's ZPD. If you're not familiar with the topic, I highly recommend you have a look at this term. Yes. And it has to do really with how much you want um, to evolve, let's say, and how much it is possible cognitively for you to do at a certain level. Positive discipline and nonviolent communication is going to help you be at a state of mind that is not going to block your cognitive performance. So, the bonus, which is not really at the title, but I'm bringing here, is visible learning. And you will see that it connects to the other parts that we have talked about so far. So visible learning, as you know, it is about developing autonomy. If you're not familiarized with the concepts of visible learning, there is this great book by Professor John Hattie on the topic. There is a series of books actually, so I highly recommend anything that has to do with this. It has to do with formative assessment, which is not only about assessment of learning, but assessment for learning and assess other types of assessment as well. It's not only about what you can perform in a real life task, let's say, but about how you got there, the strategies that you used, and how much you would be able to use these strategies um, in other times. Yes. And it is about understanding where students come from, where they're going, and how they're getting there. You see that it's connected to the ZPD concept that I've just brought, right? So I've made a big pack of this, and I started trying to apply this in this context. So we have a teacher like me, which is I've had 20-year experience, yeah. Relevant background in the area. I hold CELTA, ICELT, certificates on positive discipline. I am graduated in pedagogy. I'm taking post graduation now in bilingualism, so it, it is relevant. However, with all of this, the moment to talk to students was terrible. Yeah, sorry. I had a big issue when I was giving feedback to my students. I didn't have any kind of frame that I followed, so it was really a problem for me, which unfortunately has resulted in plummeting motivation. So my students were not motivated to continue studying with me, and I started having a high number of dropouts. So what I started doing, in the beginning of the semester, I started to align students' expectations. Really, I had almost 20 students per class, and I would sit like 5 minutes, 10 minutes with each of them. Um, I know it takes some time, but it pays off. Yeah. And something that is important, I ask them to record everything. For a person like me that likes technological items, I started making Google Jamboards with them with all their motivations and everything. But they could write it down on their notebooks, for example, but it should be something that they could rely on during the semester. Yes. Also, during classes, remembering what they had as expectations. I would start my lesson setting success criteria, so I would leave very clear to them what they were doing, how they would get there. So, all of these very important information that they needed to have during the class. And I would display the kind of desirable behavior that I expected from them. So, if they claimed that it was difficult, I would just treat them firmly but with kindness. I would point out maybe some kind of behavior that was taking them to this kind of mistake, let's put it this way. I started explaining what was the difference between a mistake concerning, let's say, a standard and something that would be okay to be used in a communication. So, not only about discrete items, but also their attitude towards the process of learning, which they could apply to anything that they were learning about English outside the classroom. As well as that, there was the moment of feedback, and this was a very big thing. I documented in all the classes every feedback that I was giving to them, and I was also showing them through the nonviolent communication a way to realign the students' expectations. So maybe there were mistakes, but I would say to them, in that framework of the nonviolent communication, maybe that wasn't correct at that moment, but now they were equipped with strategies to go on. So I feel that positive discipline and visible learning would go throughout the class when we are expecting the exercises, the tasks, and nonviolent communication would be used on the feedback and with any interaction that I would have one to one with my students. And that made a cycle. And obviously, with all of this, I was documenting every single step of the way. I'm a very big advocate of teachers not working more than what they should. So, something that I've tried to instill in them was that they would have to take notes of their feelings, the strategies that they learned, and so on, because this was something for them. So, I wouldn't have to take notes for myself. I did, but the most important thing is that they would have notes of their journey. Yes, and this actually was the cycle of learning. Beginning of the semester, during classes, feedback. During classes, feedback. Since in the school where I work, we had 4 course parts, I had a quick realignment of strategies, expectations, and so on in the end of each course part. But it was always within these 3 points in here. I have to say that after this, 9 out of 10 students started feeling more motivated. They would claim and they would say very clearly that because they were having clearer expectations, they were presented with a communication that was kinder, motivation was bigger. Yes. So before I present to you the final results, I would like you to consider this student here. I would like you to reflect on it for about a minute. Yes. And you can even take notes, let's say in bullet points, of what you would do in this situation. So I'm going to give you a minute for you to read everything. Actually, a little bit less, but try to read and think of how you would deal with this person. I'm sure that you've had at least one student in your life like this, right? You may have had some notes of how you would deal with this student, but I would like you to present what I would present to them. As you can see, this is what I would talk to them, especially this part under here. So I would come up to him in the feedback moment after all of this in the cycle, and I would say, John, I see that you've been feeling demotivated with English. You see, I have made an observation. That worries me because I know how much English is important for you, and I wouldn't like to see you give up. This is how I'm feeling about that observation that I've made. I understand it's important for you to feel progress, to feel motivated to continue. So this is about the needs that the student is having. So I would like you to try the following. Find ways to make English be a part of your life through music, songs, and others. And of course, you can make it as detailed as possible so that students have a clear idea of what they have to do, what they should do. Of course, this is not a one-sided conversation. You would have to listen to him and maybe ask questions about why they have been feeling demotivated. And remember, it is about listening with empathy. Yes? So, of course, you should, as I just said, adjust your plans, make it direct, help John understand he can include English in his life in a smooth manner. Yes. Set aside some realistic time. Tell him to have other conversations. You will be available to have other conversations in the near future. And keep checking periodically how he has been improving. Keep a record of everything. So, how about the students? My student's voice. So, one of my students presented this. My teacher at school, she taught me a better way to talk to my friends when we're in a fight. In this, nonviolent communication helped him communicate with his friends. And he was a very challenging student. Yes. So it's amazing. It's the first time I feel that my teacher listens to me and I feel that she gets me. I don't feel stressed when I learn here. And this was Anna, 16 years old at the time, weak B2, and she had this reputation of being a nightmare. Turns out she was a sweetie. And finally, when I started this term, I had decided that this was my last semester. I didn't know what to do anymore because I couldn't seem to learn anything. Now I've been learning a lot. I'm able to communicate. There is a long road ahead, but it's the first time I feel confident. Victoria, 25 years old, she had been on A1 for years, and now she's finally going to A2. Yes. So, this is just some of my students' voices. I can share any of my results with you guys. But I truly can say that this was changing. This was a watershedding moment for me. It made me have a relationship with my students in a more respectful way. But what about the giraffes, right? Well, before I go to the references, um, giraffes, they are a symbol of nonviolent communication because they have big ears that are ready to listen. And among the mammals, they have one of the biggest hearts. Yeah. So I would like to invite you all to be more like the giraffes, right? Let's start listening to our students with empathy. Let's try to guide them in a way that's firm but kind. And I'm sure that the students will be able to have more motivation and learn in a more cognitive um, manner, in a more cognitively um, better manner, yes. And that's it. So I really would like to thank everyone for this. And this is some of my references. Thank you very much. Thank you, British Council, BB, ELT, for the amazing opportunity. And thank you.
Muito obrigada, Fabiana. Obrigada a todo mundo que está participando no chat. Os comentários estão ótimos, elogiando a sessão, compartilhando ideias, compartilhando sugestões. Todas as sessões de hoje têm sido, a galera tem participado bastante. Então, eu vou ler alguns dos comentários que saíram no chat sobre alguns comentários, algumas sugestões que saíram no chat sobre esse assunto. E enquanto eu vou fazendo isso, eu vou pedir para vocês também colocarem no chat o que vocês têm achado da ELT Week até agora, o que tem ajudado, o que os nossos conteúdos têm ajudado vocês, se vocês acham que vão conseguir aplicar na sala de aula um pouco do nosso material, um pouco do que vocês estão aprendendo aqui. E sobre o assunto da palestra de agora, a Alessandra colocou que gosta muito de uma frase que diz que um conflito é um convite para um diálogo, para iniciar uma relação mais verdadeira e próxima. Ela botou que essa frase é do Dominic Barter. Sobre a palestra, a Sueli também falou que é muito importante relacionar o que se aprende em sala de aula com o mundo ao redor. A Sueli também falou que a disciplina positiva é uma ferramenta muito poderosa e que também torna as pessoas parte do processo. A Jéssica, ainda falando sobre um dos exemplos que a Fabiana deu, falando sobre o aluno que tentaria agir da mesma forma, tentaria entender a rotina do aluno para propor as ideias que se encaixem para ele. Obrigada, gente, pelos comentários que estão dizendo que está excelente, que é um assunto muito importante. Alguém tem mais alguma referência, mais alguma leitura sobre comunicação não violenta que vocês gostariam de trazer? A Jéssica comentou não sobre essa sessão, sobre o que eu perguntei sobre o restante da ELT Week, falando que ficou muito interessada na parte de acessibilidade e o dia de ontem foi bastante enriquecedor. Bom, a gente fica feliz com isso. A ideia é que sejam interessantes, mas que também sejam para o aprimoramento de vocês, que vocês consigam utilizar em sala de aula. O Wagner falou que são muito boas todas as ideias levantadas, que é um assunto muito relevante hoje em dia. Mônica colocou que a semana tem sido incrível, tem mais ainda, a gente tem mais Future of English daqui a pouco, tem mais sessões amanhã e sábado. A Alessandra botou que é um bom tema apresentado. Fico feliz que vocês tenham gostado, que vocês estejam gostando dos assuntos, que tenha sido relevante. Só lembrar que toda essa palestra, assim como as outras, vão ficar disponíveis mais tempo, se vocês quiserem assistir mais alguma vez, se vocês quiserem compartilhar com os amigos de vocês, compartilhar com alguém que vocês acham que vai utilizar. E também nessa questão das palestras que vão ficar aqui disponíveis para vocês. Caso alguém não tenha visto, na segunda-feira a gente teve uma sessão um pouquinho mais longa, que foi de 3 horas, que ela é um curso sobre gerenciamento de mudanças nas escolas. Ela é voltada para lideranças escolares, mas ela também trata de temas como gerenciamento de conflitos, que também são muito úteis para educadores. Se vocês quiserem voltar lá na nossa playlist e dar uma olhadinha no que rolou na segunda de manhã. Certo, gente? Então, por agora é isso. Eu vou dar um intervalo de 20 minutinhos para vocês e daqui a pouco a gente volta com a nossa próxima sessão de Future of English. Continuem fazendo os comentários de vocês ali no chat. A gente fica sempre muito feliz de ver que vocês estão gostando e que vocês estão participando mesmo das sessões.
Boa noite a todos vocês que se conectam com a gente. Hoje, 31 de agosto, às 18 horas do Brasil, para mais uma sessão da série The Future of English. Eu sou Alessandra Moura, sou gerente da área de Educação Básica e de Língua Inglesa do British Council no Brasil. Vou fazer minha audiodescrição. Eu sou uma mulher de cabelos castanhos, olhos castanhos, pele branca. Hoje eu estou usando um óculos de armação vermelho, estou com um blazer branco e uma blusa vinho, cor de vinho, bem escura. Falo com vocês de São Paulo, mas dá para perceber pelo meu sotaque, eu sou carioca e tenho também raízes amazônicas pela parte da minha mãe. Bom, para começar, quero pedir para vocês esquentarem para a nossa sessão interativa, todas as sessões deste horário sobre a pesquisa Futuro da Língua Inglesa são sessões interativas, a gente fica bastante no chat. Então vamos aquecer os dedos e postem lá para mim de onde vocês se conectam hoje. Oba! Tem uma turma que já postou. Boa noite para Recife, São Paulo, capital, Rio de Janeiro, ó. Tem um oi aqui do Emílio, nosso gerente de educação de inglês também. Campo Grande, Mato Grosso do Sul, Afogados de Ingazeira, Pernambuco, Cacoal, Rondônia, Montanha, no Espírito Santo. Oba, bastante gente. Ó, de fato, pelas inscrições que nós recebemos, mais de 5.000 inscrições até o momento, porque as inscrições continuam abertas até dia 15 de setembro, né? Então, continue contando para os seus colegas, para outros teachers, que está rolando, que as inscrições continuam abertas. Até 15 de setembro, vocês podem assistir a gravação e quem se inscrever vai receber um e-mail com instruções para receber também um certificado de 24 horas de sessões de formação continuada pela ELT Week. Eu ia dizer que, de acordo com as inscrições, realmente nós temos pessoas, teachers e profissionais de educação interessados, pesquisadores também, de todo o Brasil. Então, posso dizer com tranquilidade, boa noite, Brasil. Good night no, not yet. Good afternoon, Brasil. Vamos lá, tem mais gente. Santa Cruz do Capibaribe, olha só, Pernambuco. Guarulhos, aqui de São Paulo. Caruaru, Pernambuco. Ah, que beleza, gente, muito legal. Itaboraí, no Rio. Bacana, muito bom. Também recebemos alguns comentários na última sessão sobre a percepção, né, de vocês para a ELT Week. Eu vou ler 2 só, para a gente não se estender muito e já a gente mergulha no tema central da nossa sessão. Então, o primeiro comentário que eu trago aqui é de... Cadê? Eu tomei nota. Tá aqui. Gente, eu tô trabalhando em 3 telas, então, quando eu olho para cá e para lá, eu tô aqui com você. Vamos lá, Elissa Sorvilho. Estou tão feliz de ter a oportunidade de participar desse evento com temas tão relevantes. Ai, que bom. E Mônica Salib, this week has been incredible. A gente fica muito feliz, muito satisfeito mesmo, e esse é o objetivo. A ideia é que a ELT Week tenha muitos conteúdos variados, conteúdos relevantes, que façam sentido para vocês. Então, fazendo já um esquenta da avaliação que eu espero que vocês respondam no final da semana, conta aqui para mim, pelo chat, o que vocês acharam até agora mais interessante? O que vocês acharam mais interessante, seja na ELT Week ou na própria sessão do Future of English? Deixa eu dar uma olhadinha aqui no chat de novo. O que temos? Olha, temos Pouso Alegre de Minas Gerais. Legal. Interior do Espírito Santo. Ah, que legal! Eu tô achando que eu vou encontrar a Alexandra lá em Vitória. Bacana! Vai sim, vai sim. É, muita gente de Pernambuco. Paulo tá animado aqui, são conterrâneos. Bom, vamos lá. Sessão de hoje do The Future of English. Então, só relembrando, para quem for assistir a gravação e for assistir essa sessão pela primeira vez, essa série, The Future of English foi uma pesquisa do British Council que foi realizada, foi lançada esse ano, foi feita com base levaram anos, 3 anos para fazer essa pesquisa também, e elas tomaram como referência uma publicação de 10 anos atrás que procurou mapear quais eram as tendências para ensino da língua inglesa para daqui a 10 anos, ou seja, para agora. Então, a primeira proposta da pesquisa foi validar se aquelas tendências tinham acontecido. E muito curioso é que deu para perceber que não é possível validar, muito difícil fazer um exercício de projeção do que realmente vai ser uma tendência por conta inclusive da influência da tecnologia. Então, a primeira sessão dessa semana, na segunda-feira, a gente falou sobre as principais perguntas desse projeto de pesquisa. Então, a gente passou passo a passo pelas perguntas que foram feitas no projeto. A nossa segunda sessão falou sobre como que o inglês, era uma pergunta, uma das perguntas. Será que a empregabilidade está condicionando o futuro da língua inglesa? E a gente discutiu isso bastante, a gente ouviu os achados da pesquisa, mas a gente discutiu bastante aqui no chat com o público sobre qual era a percepção do Brasil sobre isso. Será que o mundo do trabalho, né, dos empregos, fora da escola, e a gente está falando de fora da escola, será que realmente eles estão dando tom sobre qual vai ser o futuro da língua inglesa também para o Brasil, né? Porque isso foi um achado global. A resposta é sim, parece que sim. Mas para o Brasil, a gente discutiu bastante pelo chat e fiquei com uma sensação de que nem tanto. A gente ainda não tem não dá esse valor para a língua inglesa no mercado de trabalho em geral. Hoje, pelo menos, daqui a 10 anos, alguns exercícios, algumas reflexões sobre, sim, sempre ter uma segunda língua vai ser uma vantagem. Mas muitas reflexões sobre que, infelizmente, ter o inglês como língua franca, como segunda língua no Brasil, não necessariamente é um fato ainda. A terceira sessão, que foi a sessão de ontem, quarta-feira, a gente mergulhou na questão da automação, das tecnologias de automação e a influência delas no papel dos English teachers. Então, uso de mecanismos de inteligência artificial, uso de mecanismos automáticos de recomendação de conteúdo, de habilidade baseado na experiência do usuário. Então, são aqueles sistemas onde os estudantes, os usuários, né, estudantes, eles vão ser encaminhados para um tipo de conteúdo. Se eles responderem errado, eles são recomendados para um conteúdo anterior ou para refazer a pergunta. E também a gente falou sobre os chatbots, então, como o ChatGPT. Essa foi uma sessão ontem bastante também agitada, né, animada no chat, e a gente concluiu com uma pergunta sobre existe uma tendência, né, muita especulação sobre quais são as profissões que vão sumir com as novas tecnologias e com a inteligência artificial. E, apesar disso, há muitos indicadores globalmente de que a profissão do professor, dos educadores, não é uma delas. Ao contrário, claro que pode ressignificar e pode contribuir para mudanças nas práticas dos educadores, mas que, na verdade, o que se vê globalmente é que existe um mercado aquecido para professores e para professoras. E a gente fez essa pergunta aqui. E no Brasil, o que vocês acham? E o que os professores nos responderam aqui pelo chat, as professoras, foi: olha, eu recebo vaga todo dia, eu recebo informação todo mês. Olha, tem concurso aberto, concurso público aberto em tal cidade, em tal estado. Então, parece que é uma tendência, foi um achado da pesquisa Futuro da Língua Inglesa, que bate com a nossa sensação, a nossa percepção da audiência aqui no Brasil também. E agora a gente vai entrar na quarta sessão, mas antes de eu falar da quarta sessão, eu quero dar um spoiler sobre a quinta, que é amanhã, a última sessão. A sessão de amanhã vai tratar da realidade, a nova realidade multilingüe, que já está posta e que vai tender a continuar. A gente também vai falar, a minha colega Amy Lightfoot, ela vai falar sobre a questão do inglês como língua franca e, ao mesmo tempo, vai falar sobre como ficou, hoje em dia, está cada vez mais inócuo e sem sentido falar-se sobre o inglês nativo, o sotaque americano, o sotaque britânico, enfim, e ela explica por que isso está cada vez mais claro que não existe mais, não é alguma coisa que especialmente não tende a permanecer. Muito interessante a sessão de amanhã, e o mais legal é que a Amy teve assim o cuidado de pesquisar o Brasil e de falar sobre a nossa realidade multilingüe, e ela falar sobre como que ela enxerga a pesquisa do Future of English se comunicando com a realidade que nós temos nas escolas, especialmente no ensino da língua inglesa em geral no Brasil. Então, assim, imperdível amanhã, tá? Bom, vamos lá. Então, repetindo, essas sessões todas são bilíngues. Então, se você preferir ouvir o áudio original sem nenhum tipo de tradução, seja simultânea ou de legendas, vocês podem acessar pelo nosso YouTube do Brasil. Lá em cima está marcadinho de azul como vocês acessam o canal das Américas para assistir 100% em inglês, quem preferir. Aqui no canal do Brasil, a gente faz essa introdução e depois a gente volta. Eu vou convidar para quem for para as Américas, volta para cá, para depois, porque a gente faz todas as nossas conversas, o nosso debate aqui pelo canal do Brasil, pelo nosso chat, tá? Então, os seus comentários são muito, muito bem-vindos. É claro que tomando cuidado para que a gente tenha comentários positivos, propositivos e que contribuam para essa reflexão. Aliás, isso tem acontecido sempre, o nosso chat está extremamente rico, respeitoso e positivo, então eu agradeço muito a participação de vocês nisso. E a gente segue agora para a nossa sessão com a apresentação sobre os achados principais da pesquisa, os resultados da pesquisa, com duas das nossas lideranças globais. Mina Patel, que é a nossa liderança em pesquisa sobre avaliação de aprendizagem, e a Mina é uma das autoras da pesquisa do Future of English, e também com Steve Copeland. O Steve é a nossa liderança global no campo de pesquisas e de insights para programas de língua inglesa. Então, realmente dois profissionais de altíssimo nível, muita experiência, e vão compartilhar com vocês quais foram os principais achados da pesquisa The Future of English. Encontro vocês aqui daqui a pouquinho. Até já!
Thank you, and hello, everybody. From a rather cold and damp. Thank you, and hello, everybody. We are from a rather cold and damp London. We are delighted to have the opportunity to deliver this plenary. Great to see so this year's BBELT conference. It's great to see so many people here. Firstly, I'm going to introduce our Future of English project, and Mina will then look at the implications for teachers. So, a bit of background to kick off. So, a bit of background to kick off. The late, great In 2006, the late, great English linguist David Graddol produced his influential book English Next, which was commissioned by the British Council, in which he examined the current and potential future trends in English language learning and teaching, following on from his earlier book, The Future of English, in 1997. Now, English Next has become our most cited publication, and it provoked a huge amount of debate on the learning and teaching of English. People regularly quote data from it, even though it's 17 years old now. Our head of research and insight, in 2001, our head of research and insight, Mike Solly, was asked to give a presentation to the Society of Pakistan, and he thought it would be interesting to review Graddol's predictions 15 years after English Next. Now, this review produced some very interesting ideas. So the British Council then decided to review Graddol's predictions more formally and to draft a new list of our own proposed trends for the future of English. And this became phase 1 of our project. In phase 2, we conducted regional roundtables across the world. And phase 3 has started now with research into various areas of the future of English, recently commissioned, and a book due out in April this year. And I'm going to discuss all of these phases in this talk. So how accurate is it possible to be when making predictions like Graddol's 10 to 15 years ahead? In phase 1 of our project, we looked at his predictions and how accurate we think they turned out to be. And it'll be interesting to see if you agree with us on these. Now, Graddol made 14 predictions about the future of English. First, he predicted an increase in the numbers of people learning English to around 2 billion, and then a fairly steep decline. Was he right? Well, it's very difficult to put a definitive number on language learners worldwide, but there has definitely been a substantial rise in learner numbers, but no sign of a fall yet. As you'll see later, we predict that learner numbers will actually remain fairly steady for the foreseeable future. So he was certainly partially right there. He predicted a wider age range of learners and an increased range of needs for English. And this has happened. Courses for very young learners and specialist courses like English for aviation, for example, have become much more widely available. He predicted increased competition in teaching from markets where English is not the first language. And there is some evidence of this, particularly from Asia-based organizations. Although there have been recent law changes in China that effectively ban extra classes outside schools for kids. So that may well start to have an impact there. A decline in the private sector teenage and young adult market for EFL, and an ongoing decrease in the numbers of international degree students in English-speaking countries. Now, pre-COVID, there wasn't really any evidence of a decline in the market of teenage EFL students or international degree students, in the UK at least, although there may yet be more impact from Brexit and still possibly COVID here, and I'll touch on this again a little later. Graddol saw a move away from the so-called native speaker norm in English. Now, this idea that native speaker norms would be replaced by a more globalized concept of English hasn't really happened yet, but there are signs that this may be underway now beyond its conceptualization in academic research. It might have been the timing that Graddol wasn't quite right about. And again, we'll talk more about this one later. And he predicted a lack of opportunities for people who only speak English. But it's not really clear, not yet at least, that being monolingual is having much of an economic impact on English monoglots. So what else did Graddol predict? He predicted significant growth in the use of languages other than English on the internet. Now, we have some quite recent data on this. If we look at the first language of internet users and how much those have increased over the last couple of decades, some languages have shown dramatic increase, notably Arabic here, Russian, Indonesian, Malay, and Chinese, but also Portuguese and Spanish to an extent. But that was from a very low starting point. So English is still the first language of about a quarter of internet users. Although notice that outside the top 10, other languages make up a further quarter. Now, it's not obvious from the graph, but around 50% of internet users are actually now based in Asia. And less than 10% of global users are based in Central and South America, and only about 16% in the Americas as a whole. But in terms of language content, the content of internet pages, English still dominates. It's used in just under 60% of all websites. And this data is just from a few days ago, so it's quite up to date. So we can say that Gradol was partially right in predicting a growth of other languages. He also predicted that there'd be a growth in the use of other languages for outsourced services such as call centers, for example. But again, it's not immediately apparent that other languages are having much of an impact of the dominance of English, either in resources or in economic advantage. Gradol thought that Asia would determine the long-term future of English as a global language. Now, while Asia hasn't yet played a major role in determining the future of global English, China and India in particular may well have significant influence on this in the coming years. Gradol thought that having English would no longer give you a competitive advantage, as so many people would be able to speak it. But speaking English does definitely still provide an advantage in many contexts, although there is growing interest in learning other languages in many places. The increase in English medium education, EME, also called EMI, was predicted to force English teachers to retrain to teach other subjects as well as English. And although more specialist qualifications have become available for English teachers, particularly at master's level, we haven't yet seen mass retraining to teach other subjects using EME. And finally, Gradol predicted a major shift away from the conventional model of English as a foreign language, where the ideal teacher is supposedly a native speaker and only English is used in the classroom. Now, the shift away from that EFL model, characterized by native speaker teachers and English-only classrooms, has definitely begun. There is an increased focus on the benefits of multilingualism and increasingly translanguaging in language learning and teaching. And it's beginning to slowly filter into some teacher training and professional development, although it is slow, I think. So it's not the end of traditional EFL yet, but it might be the beginning of the end. It's worth mentioning at this point, actually, that we use the term native speaker in this discussion as that it's the term Gradol used. It's a very contentious term, particularly when we say non-native speaker. I can't say it without putting quote marks with my fingers. But it is still very widely used, and the applied linguistics and EFL communities have yet to agree on a suitable alternative. And we'll talk more about this in our book due out in April this year, and we'll be giving you a reference for that later. So it seems that Gradol may have been right about the general direction of the learning and teaching of English. He felt that English's position as a truly global language was secure, but the perceived ownership of the language was changing from those who spoke it as a first language to everyone who speaks it, including the majority who speak it as a second or other language. Mind you, this is supposing, of course, that anybody or any group can own a language, which is another question. So, given the difficulties about making any predictions about future events, why did we decide to make another set of predictions about the English language for the next decade? Well, it's not really about getting it right. It's about starting a discussion. That's what Gradol did. And that's what we're aiming to do with this project. And we'll talk later about how you can help us with this. So after we analyzed Gradol's trends, we commissioned some research to help us develop our own 16 projected trends for the next decade or so. Now, these were presented in fairly random order. You can see them here, but rather than go through each in detail, I've grouped them into different topic areas to present them to you, so you don't have to read all this small writing. Some of these projected trends appear in more than one topic, and please bear in mind these are general global trends. They may well vary between countries and regions. Some may in fact be entirely invalid in some places, and you may feel that there are some possible trends that we haven't included here. So our first topic is the growth in English language learning. As we saw in the graph earlier, we predict that the number of English language learners will remain fairly steady over the next decade and not fall as Gradol predicted. There will be major growth in online learning, and of course the COVID epidemic has accelerated that considerably. Also an ever-increasing range of more specific language programs. And studying in English-speaking countries like the UK or the US will remain an attractive option. Though again, here in the UK, the ongoing fallout from Brexit, and possibly in various places, fallout from COVID may yet continue to have an impact. While online learning will continue to increase, English will also continue to be taught as a subject in formal education. We don't anticipate too much of an increase in the use of English medium education at school level, although the starting age for studying English as a subject may get a bit older than it currently is in some places, but not all, given the evidence that we know exists on the advantages of mother tongue education. Studying face-to-face, as we said, in English-speaking countries will remain a popular option, but there will be an increased focus on using digital capabilities to give a wider range of people access to studying English. The concept of ELT as native speakers teaching a single standard form of English will continue to shift towards a more multilingual reality, with the acceptance of a range of different Englishes and the use of other languages in the classroom. English speakers will need to learn other languages in order to compete in more multilingual environments. And in some countries, particularly in post-colonial contexts, and in line with the broad movement to decolonize education and society, an emphasis on the importance of indigenous languages will move the focus away from English to an extent. As part of the shift towards more multilingual classrooms and acceptance of a range of Englishes, methods of assessment will also take more consideration of English as a global language, although native speaker norms will remain in some assessment contexts at least. EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, will become a significant focus in teaching, learning, and assessment. Two examples of this are the opening plenary at the IATEFL conference last year, which focused on inclusion, and the recent revision of the British Council's inclusion policy for our language centres, which is extremely detailed. It's nearly 100 pages long. This emphasis on EDI will be supported by increased learning online, although we have to acknowledge that many people are being excluded by the move online. So the use of digital and other technologies to increase access to learning will be vital. The emphasis on EDI will include assessment with alternative assessment methods focusing on English as a global language, despite some lingering of native speaker norms. Assessment will be more fully integrated into learning systems, and there will be a focus on the effective assessment of speaking and listening. EME, English medium education, will continue to thrive in higher education in many countries, but the focus in basic education will be on learning English as a subject, with increasing awareness that children need to learn a language that isn't their home language as a subject for several years before they can effectively be taught other subjects in that language. And in some contexts, at least, this will allow an expansion of basic education in students' home languages, particularly, we think, at primary level. And finally, English, or possibly Englishes, will continue as the main global lingua franca, including in higher education. But there will be an increasing awareness of Firstly, the importance of learning English as a subject sufficiently well before it's used as a medium of education. Secondly, the multilingual reality of many learners and teachers' lives. And thirdly, the importance of indigenous languages. So after we made our predictions, we conducted a series of regional roundtables with policymakers and policy influencers around the world to get their views on our predictions and on the future of English. Now, we conducted a total of 14 roundtables in 49 countries and territories across the world, with a total of 92 policymakers and policy influencers taking part from a range of specialities. Many in education, of course, including government ministers and department heads, but also experts in other languages, research, international affairs, economics, sport, edtech, and other areas. One of the outcomes of those phase 2 roundtables was a realization that making specific predictions, like I've just shown you, is just too difficult and too unreliable. So we moved our focus away from specific predictions towards devising a set of themes and questions that we thought would be relevant to the future of English. And we'll be presenting those themes in our book, which I'll tell you about in a minute. We then moved to phase 3 of the project, where we initiated our long-term research agenda by awarding a number of research grants to UK universities who are partnering with researchers and research participants in many other countries. And the aims of these grants are to evaluate our key themes and questions, to develop methods for measuring and tracking them over time, and to look at their impact on EFL, particularly in relation to developments in technology. Now, we've awarded our initial research grants to 4 UK universities who will report in about 3 years' time. And this is the start of phase 3 of the project. And these 4 universities will collaborate with other academics and partners in 42 other countries, namely France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland, Russia, Turkey, Ukraine, Georgia, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, Japan, China, Thailand, Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Vietnam, Nepal, Myanmar, Mexico, Argentina, Cuba, Chile, Ecuador, Brazil, Nicaragua, Jamaica, Venezuela, Colombia, Egypt, Malawi, Tanzania, Nigeria, Kenya, Cameroon, Ghana, Sudan, South Africa, and Ethiopia. I used to be able to do that in one breath, but I'm getting too old. Now, as well as these research projects, we are currently writing a book discussing the Future of English project to date. We're planning to publish that in April this year. It'll be freely available on our website for everybody to read and to download, and Mina will give you details of how to access that at the end of her presentation. And now I'm handing over to Mina.
Thank you very much, Steve. And hello, everyone from Malaysia. It's lovely to be talking to you. We're very excited. Okay, so in my part of the presentation, I'm going to focus on teachers and what the future of English might mean for them. So to do that, I'd like to talk about English language teaching before the COVID pandemic in a very, very general way, just to begin with, just to get us all on the same page. So let's start by looking at some of the resources teachers around the world use. So we, and I include myself, we use course books. Whether they are local or international, they provide the backbone of the majority of English language teaching around the world. Boards, be they black, white, or electronic, many, many teachers have access to some kind of board in the classroom. The internet. Increasingly, many teachers, even before the pandemic, turned to the internet for resources to complement their existing classroom practice. Computer labs. I know some of us might think they're a bit dated, but in some countries, computer labs are still used as a supplement to traditional classroom teaching for lessons. Tablets. Some countries are integrating the use of tablets into classrooms as they can be more cost effective and more flexible than computers or even laptops. And finally, mobile phones. More learners than ever before have mobile phones. Some teachers leverage on this as an additional resource. Now, this isn't a definitive list. It's just to get us in the general frame of mind of what teaching used to be like. So let's now talk about methodology pre-pandemic. Again, I'm talking very, very generally. So methodology can be teacher, learner, or learning-centered, or it can be a combination of all three. But if it's going to be a combination of all three, it depends on two things. One, the teacher, and two, the curriculum. I'm not going to go into details here because I think you can follow where I'm getting at, but we can have this discussion later. Methodology can be assessment orientated. Whether we like it or not, most methodology used in schools today is assessment oriented. Again, I think you know what I'm talking about. Pre-pandemic, most of us were used to and comfortable with face-to-face delivery and therefore face-to-face methodology. However, even pre-pandemic, there was some online teaching, whether it was fully online or whether it was blended, but perhaps not in mainstream education. So in terms of methodology, very vaguely, 4 very broad areas of what we covered pre-pandemic. Then the coronavirus pandemic came along. Who could have predicted it? Who would have thought that life as we knew it would change so much? But who can actually predict the future? Well, as we've just heard from Steve, David Gradol made a very good attempt at it. Steve also talked about the regional roundtables. We did one in the Americas, and I'd like to share with you some of the highlights from the Americas roundtables. Not details, but just some of the important things that came out from that roundtable discussion. The countries represented at the roundtable were Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and the USA. And I'm going to share with you 4 main things that came out from that discussion. Teachers and teacher education came out very strongly. Teachers are very important, but across the countries that represented, there were 2 concerns. The first concern was around not having enough English teachers. And the second was around the quantity and quality of training for English teachers. The second thing that came out quite strongly was equity and inclusion. And Steve touched on this as well. The countries represented had many similarities. They were all concerned about teachers and training. But there were also many disparities, both across the countries and within the countries. And these disparities, among many, included not having access to quality education and resources, and was sometimes exacerbated by the urban and rural divides. So disparities in terms of what some people had and what some people didn't have. And then employment was seen as a strong driver for learning English, particularly in the hospitality sector. And that was across most countries that were represented as well. And of course, technology, seen as an enabler for many and a disruptor for those who don't have access to it. Generally, the quality of provision using technology was questioned. So those that did have it were questioning the quality of the provision it provided, teachers provided. And participants stated quite strongly that technology shouldn't be defined too narrowly. And I think this is a really important point. Technology is not just about laptops and tablets and mobile phones, but in some contexts, it's about television and radio as well. But what does this all mean from an educational systemic perspective? The participants in the roundtable were talking about contexts they live in and systems they work in. The Comprehensive Learning System by Barry O'Sullivan proposes that for learning programs to function efficiently, they should be seen as one comprehensive system. Within the system, the 3 core elements, curriculum, delivery, and assessment, must be based on a single philosophy of learning that is supported by clearly defined models of language ability and progression and underpinned by a measurement model. Failure to ensure that all 3 work fully in harmony is likely to lead to a failure of the system. So if one of the components, curriculum, delivery, or assessment, is a little bit off kilter, then the system fails to function as it should do. But the system itself does not exist in a vacuum, but instead it is situated within a specific educational and social context, which is defined by key stakeholders who comprise that context. For us, teachers are considered key stakeholders. So if we take the data that we have collected so far from the 14 roundtables and think about a comprehensive learning system, what does that mean for teachers? Before we find out, I'm going to give you a couple of questions I'd just like you to think about. The questions are to do with teachers and teaching practice. They're for you to think about and perhaps discuss with your colleagues. And if you like, answer in the chat or comment in the chat. That would be great. So the first question is, has anything changed in English language teaching since the pandemic? So we all went online. Perhaps we didn't all go online, I don't know. But since we're coming back post-pandemic, what changes can you see? So have a think, and if you want to comment or ask a question, pop it in the chat. And then the second question is the one that you can see on your screen right now. The single biggest change to English language learning and teaching will be in the area of technology, equity of access, assessment, pedagogy, or something else. What do you think? So thinking about the future, where do you think English language learning and teaching will change? And we can discuss this in the Q&A. So I'm going to leave you these for now, and we'll come back to them later. So let's talk about English language teachers. Let's talk about you. All our data tells us that teachers are very much at the heart of the teaching and learning process and the system as a whole. Regardless of the mainly technological shifts during the pandemic, teachers still remain very important. However, in some places in the world, there are concerns about the capacity. Two questions are asked here. One, and I've mentioned this already, are there enough English teachers? And two, are there enough skilled English teachers? So that takes us back to the training element. Then there's technology. Is it a help or a hindrance? Do teachers like it? Can teachers exploit it effectively? Some countries are talking about AI, but what about those contexts that have limited or no access to technology at all? So if we go back to the question, can teachers exploit it effectively? Again, goes back to training and development. And finally, what are the implications of all of this for development and training? Well, in my opinion, the implications are considerable and multifaceted, and at all levels of the education system. The implications affect policy, institutions, and of course you, the individuals. These are very big questions, and as I said, the Future of English project doesn't claim to have all, if any, of the answers, but we do hope that it will help us in some way towards finding the answers. So, having talked about some implications for teachers, what are the factors that influence them? Policy decisions are a big factor. Decisions about the use and role of English, the curriculum, national assessments, materials, etc. These are the decisions that are out of our hands, but they nonetheless have an impact on what happens in the classroom. The learner. Earlier on, I asked what had changed post-pandemic. One answer is the learner. The learner has changed in different ways in different contexts. Generally, the learner is more aware of possibilities and opportunities, and the learner is more engaged. The learner is more present in the process. At least that's what the data tells us so far. There are other changes, but this is a big one. And of course, if the learner changes, so does what happens in the classroom. So, but for me, it's you, the teachers, that have the biggest influence on yourselves and what you do. I say this because regardless of all the external factors, regardless of all the policies in place or the resources you have or don't have, what you do in the classroom, and equally what you do not do, what you accept, what you change, what you reject, comes down to what you believe about teaching and learning and your own role within that. Our beliefs about education generally and the teaching and learning process and our professional development drive our practice and hopefully drive our development. Professional development can be institutional and driven by schools and governments, but it can also be personal, driven by our own interests and our desire to know more about a particular aspect of teaching and learning. In the previous slide, when I talked about the learner being one of the biggest changes, I wasn't just talking about students we teach. I was talking about ourselves as learners, taking ownership of what we want to learn, using our own agency to be better informed and improve our classroom practices to help optimize the teaching and learning experience. The three elements on the screen feed into each other, inform each other, and now more than ever, I think we should be asking ourselves, what do I believe about teaching and learning English? What are my principles around it? What is my role within the learning system? And how can I best achieve what I want, both for me and my students? It's about articulating or revisiting what we believe about what we do. It's about using our beliefs to review what we do in the classroom, and then using that review of our practice to take ownership of our development to drive our own change. So if you ask me what's in store for English teachers looking into the future, my answer is, it's you, the teachers, taking ownership of the importance that's been placed on you and having the confidence to be the change you want to see. And you can start this right now by having your say and participating in our Future of English survey for educators. You can just scan the QR code and it will take you straight to the survey. And if you'd like to know more about the project, you can visit the website, the URL's there. And finally, I know Steve's mentioned the book several times. A book about the project and its findings so far will be published in April this year. So please watch this space. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to the Q&A session and talking to you about the content of this presentation. Thank you very much.
Boa noite. Estou de volta. Bom, a Mina termina a apresentação com um QR Code para vocês responderem a um questionário. Depois vocês podem voltar um pouquinho a gravação para poder responder para ela. Certamente ela vai gostar. Infelizmente, está muito tarde neste momento. Lá em Londres, né? São 15 para as 11 da noite lá. Então, não foi possível a Mina se juntar a gente pessoalmente e nem o Steve para fazer comentários, mas essas perguntas que a gente postou aqui no chat são perguntas deles para vocês e eles querem voltar e ver as suas respostas. Então, vamos dar uma olhadinha como é que estamos aqui no chat. Antes de mais nada, eu vou retomar os meus agradecimentos a todo mundo que está participando aqui ao vivo hoje. Então, já citei vários. Vou citar agora Arujá, São Paulo, Pinhalzinho, São Paulo, Uruguaiana, Rio Grande do Sul, Joaquim Távora, norte do Paraná, legal. Olha, turma da Universidade Estadual de Ferreira de Santana, da Bahia, está presente, representado. Jandira, do Rio, Volta Redonda, do Rio também, muito bom, legal, fica muito feliz. Então, assim, isso mostra a riqueza dos comentários também e a diversidade de olhares, né, para as nossas perguntas aqui. Então, sobre o que vocês mais gostaram na ELT Week até agora, um comentário: gostei bastante do número de sessões sobre práticas inclusivas no evento. Verdade. Hoje e ontem a gente falou disso e o Steve e a Mina trouxeram a importância do olhar para equidade, diversidade e inclusão para mapear quais são as tendências, né? Esse é um olhar, um foco que precisa cada vez ser mais levado em conta, já está em processo, né? A gente está numa tendência, já vive ela e ela segue. Essa é a previsão que a gente tem sobre o futuro da língua inglesa. Ela cada vez vai ser mais equitativa e inclusiva. Então, assistam às sessões anteriores de hoje e de ontem, que são especificamente sobre isso. Um comentário sobre o que te surpreende nos achados da pesquisa, né? Alguns comentários sobre isso, sobre a demanda de formação continuada e uma constante um retorno ao que são as tendências, ao que dá, desculpa, não as que são as tendências, mas um retorno às metodologias, uma revisão das metodologias de acordo com o que está sendo demandado no momento pelo público. A Mina trouxe bem a questão da pandemia. Quem é que prevê uma pandemia? Ninguém, né? No entanto, a pandemia fez a gente rever as nossas abordagens, as metodologias e as pedagogias. Então, alguns comentários sobre surpresa, como existe uma tendência a realmente a gente ainda falhar na formação continuada, né, constante dos educadores. Lembrando que isso é um retrato das Américas que eles trouxeram, especificamente, não específico do Brasil. Que mais? Sobre as mudanças e as tendências, a Mina fez essa pergunta para vocês. O que vocês acham que mais vai mudar? Né? Comentário sobre a avaliação, os sistemas de avaliação sobre aprendizagem, da Sueli. Um comentário super interessante da Branca Jandira, dizendo que a necessidade é a mãe das novas ferramentas, né? Necessity is the mother of new tools. Querendo dizer que é isso, a pandemia provocou uma grande resiliência em todas as profissões, em todos os aspectos, em todas as pessoas, inclusive no ensino da língua inglesa. Mas, por outro lado, tem comentários sobre, olha que interessante, a gente descobriu que o ensino online, que o ensino remoto é possível. É claro que isso não tira o caráter desafiador dele, mas realmente, de fato, a gente acabou descobrindo os caminhos para viabilizar o ensino, mesmo o ensino remoto e não só o presencial. Embora exista uma tendência de que o ensino presencial, como a gente viu no Future of English, ele permanece, né? Não vai ter propriamente uma substituição. Aí, uma pergunta sobre como vocês se imaginam no futuro usando as tecnologias. Então, comentários de que, sim, eu me imagino usando mais tablets e smartphone, mas mais em escolas particulares e em cursos, porque na rede pública ainda é muito complicado. A gente sabe que, embora o nosso país seja extremamente conectado, ele também é extremamente desigual em matéria de conexão. Então, eu entendo o ponto de vista da teacher Daiane aqui que ela trouxe. Would you ask to bring neuroscience into the field of education, please? Maravilhoso o comentário da Marta. Realmente, a neurociência é uma das ciências, né, que mais avança, e acho que a gente tem muita oportunidade de trazer ele mais para o ensino da língua. Existem muitas pesquisas nesse campo, e eu vou tomar nota desse tema para a ELT Week do ano que vem. Obrigada, Marta. Que mais? E aí, outros comentários sobre smartphones, dizendo que já estão sendo usados mais na sala de aula, mas é curioso, porque também existe um movimento de se tirar os smartphones da sala, da escola, né? Considerando o quanto, às vezes, eles bloqueiam o desenvolvimento de habilidades socioemocionais nos estudantes. A gente também tocou nesse assunto ontem. E, aliás, hoje de manhã, aliás, antes dessa sessão, o tema foi comunicação não violenta. Enfim, um dos pontos, uma das habilidades que, para ser desenvolvida, a tecnologia precisa sair um pouco do cenário. Então, existe esse debate também. Muito interessante também, e um ponto destacado pela Jéssica, e aí eu vou recomendar a nossa sessão de sábado, tá? Sabadão, de manhã, nós vamos ter uma oficina sobre a competência necessária para educadores em geral e também para English teachers de desenvolver o seu próprio caminho de formação continuada. Né? Então, o Graham Stanley, que é o nosso diretor de programas de língua inglesa para as Américas, ele vai fazer uma oficina na prática, estarei com ele também, trazendo alguns mecanismos, algumas ferramentas e alguns instrumentais que ajudam os professores a desenvolver sua própria trajetória de formação continuada. E eu trarei um convite, que só será feito no sábado, nessa linha também para vocês, um projeto que a gente vai implementar ainda este ano. Enfim, o nosso chat está animadíssimo, faltam 3 minutos para o nosso horáriozinho aqui de acabar, então eu vou agradecer, deixa eu ver se tem mais algum comentário aqui. Bom, Simone de Louveira também dá um alô, legal. E outro comentário aqui de Lucas: eu gostei de todos os tópicos, mas ainda mais trazendo professores tatuados. Legal. Poxa vida, eu não tenho tatuagem, eu vou providenciar no ano que vem. E, enfim, muito legal. Ele menciona ele fala que sofreu discriminação porque tinha tatuagem. Poxa vida. Nossa, como se isso significasse que alguém é ou não é capaz de exercer a profissão de professor, de educador. Enfim, muito legal, muitos comentários, animadíssimo. Eu quero agradecer vocês por mais uma sessão, por mais terminar o nosso dia da ELT Week juntos e trocando tantas ideias, tantas informações. E espero vocês amanhã. Amanhã a gente tem 2 sessões imperdíveis. Além dessa do The Future of English, que eu já mencionei, a gente vai ter a sessão com John Shackleton. John Shackleton é a nossa liderança para a formação de formadores, ou seja, teacher educators. E ele vai falar sobre os potenciais de desenvolvimento de carreira em parceria com o British Council nesse campo. Então, se você já ou você se interessa em se tornar um formador de teachers, não percam a sessão com o John. Vai ser muito especial e muito rica, e esse é um campo que estamos desenvolvendo no Brasil, inclusive com parceria de Brass Tissue, que é a Associação de Professores de Língua Inglesa do Brasil. E então, eu me despeço, espero vocês amanhã. Até mais. Agora sim, good night. Bye, bye.